Who hasn't dreamed of being buried alive? Well, it's happened to many people throughout history, such as this guy whose name you probably know. But did you know that even though he was one of the most powerful men in ancient times, no one actually knows where he is buried? How does this happen? Why doesn't anyone know where Alexander the Great is buried? Who exactly is Alexander the Great? And what happened to him before he met his gruesome fate? Let's find out in today's episode of Fake News. Alexander the Great was buried alive, accidentally, of course. Now, who doesn't know about Alexander the Great? This legendary military commander and king of Macedon was born on July 20th, 356 BC in Pella, which is now part of Greece. His empire was so vast that at the time of his death, it was the largest land-based empire the world has ever seen. He ruled over Greece, Egypt, and parts of Asia. He was only 32 years old when he kicked the bucket. But how did this young and ambitious ruler die? Let's take a look back into the past. The year is 323 BC. The place is Babylon, which is now part of Iraq. Alexander the Great, who at the time was suffering from a high fever and was close to death, sent for his close friend and general, Perdiccas. After summoning him to his bedside, he called for all the leading men of his empire and read his last will and testament to them. According to the will, he wanted his empire to be divided equally among his friends and generals after his death. As expected, they agreed. They swore to uphold the terms of the will and take care of his mother, Olympias. However, one man in particular was not happy with this arrangement. Alexander's half-brother, Ptolemy, who was the governor of Egypt, refused to accept the terms of the will. Later, Ptolemy would try to persuade other members of the group to accept him as the sole ruler of Egypt. After reading the will, Alexander the Great ordered that his body be embalmed and placed in a golden coffin. He also told his men to keep him awake for 7 days so that he could recover. What? Yes, you heard that right. The great leader was kept awake for 7 long days. During this time, his condition continued to deteriorate. On the 8th day, he suffered a massive seizure and eventually lost consciousness. This was the end of Alexander the Great. His loyal men were saddened by their master's death, but they honored his final wish and kept him awake for another 8 days until the 16th day. His body still showed no signs of decay. On the 17th day, his body was finally taken for burial. A funeral procession of 40 elephants carrying tributes from distant lands marched through the streets of Babylon. After a magnificent ceremony, his coffin was placed inside an enormous tomb. The place where Alexander the Great was buried was kept secret for several years. However, later, it was discovered by the Greek historian Strabo. In his book, Geography, he mentioned that Alexander was buried near the city of Babylon. Unfortunately, over the years, the exact location of the tomb was lost. But wait, there's more to the story. The legendary ruler wasn't just buried alive, he was also kept awake for more than 2 weeks. So what's the big deal if he was dead? Then let me tell you this. You may think that if someone is dead, then they should be left alone. But in some cases, it's important to keep the dead person awake. For example, when someone dies from a contagious disease, it's important to keep their body from decaying so that the disease doesn't spread. There are many reasons why someone might be kept awake after death, but in Alexander's case, it was simply because he was too important to be buried right away. By keeping his body awake, the rulers of Macedonia showed their dominance over the region. They also used Alexander's death as a way to control the other rulers in the empire. So how did they keep him awake? You might be surprised to learn that they didn't use modern technology like ventilators or defibrillators. Instead, they used a combination of wood, water, and sheer manpower. The first step in keeping a body awake is to remove all air from the room. This was done by closing all the windows and doors and burning incense to mask the smell of decay. Next, the body was placed on a raised platform and surrounded by buckets of water. This was to prevent the body from drying out and becoming brittle. Finally, guards were stationed around the clock to make sure no one disturbed the slumbering emperor. These men would rotate every 4 hours so that they could rest. The entire process of keeping the body awake was repeated every 10 days for a total of 40 days. This was necessary because Alexander's body wouldn't start to decay until after that time. Now, you might be wondering why his body didn't start to decay right away. This is due to a process known as autolysis. During autolysis, the body breaks down its own cells and tissues. This process is accelerated when the body is exposed to air, but it can be slowed down when the body is kept in a cool, dark place. In Alexander's case, his body was kept in a tomb that was both cool and dark, which is why autolysis took so long to occur. As we said before, Alexander the Great was one of the most powerful rulers in ancient times. He conquered much of the known world, and his empire stretched from the Balkans to Pakistan. Despite his many accomplishments, however, little is known about his personal life. Most of what we know comes from the writings of his enemies and those who wished to take over his empire. Some historians believe that Alexander was a tyrant who ruled with an iron fist. Others believe he was a visionary leader who brought stability and prosperity to his people. What we do know for sure is that Alexander was a brilliant military commander. He led his armies to victory in countless battles, and his conquests would have been impossible without his strategic genius. Alexander was also a shrewd politician. He knew how to play the game of power, and he used this knowledge to his advantage. However, not all was well in Alexander's empire. Despite his many accomplishments, he was never able to fully control his empire. The various regions of his empire were constantly rebelling against his rule, and it was only a matter of time before his empire fell apart. This is one of the reasons why Alexander was eager to find a successor. He knew that without a strong leader, his empire would quickly fall into chaos. That's why he summoned his close friends and generals to his deathbed and read his last will and testament to them. He wanted to ensure that his empire would be divided equally among his friends, and that no one would be able to take advantage of his death. Unfortunately, not everyone agreed to these terms. Ptolemy, Alexander's half-brother and the governor of Egypt, refused to accept the terms of the will. This caused a civil war that would eventually lead to the downfall of Alexander's empire. Now, you might be wondering what happened to Alexander's body after it was kept awake for 40 days. When the body began to decay, it was removed from the tomb and buried in a separate chamber. This chamber was filled with gold coins and other valuable items, and then the entrance was sealed with bricks. The location of this tomb is still unknown, but it is believed to be somewhere near the city of Babylon. There are many theories as to why Alexander's body was buried separately from the rest of his remains. Some believe that it was done to prevent grave robbers from stealing his body. Others believe that it was done out of respect for the emperor. Whatever the reason, the fact remains that Alexander's body was buried separately from the rest of his remains. In conclusion, Alexander the Great was one of the most powerful rulers in ancient times. He was a brilliant military commander and a shrewd politician. However, his empire would eventually fall apart after his death. One of the strangest things about Alexander's death is that his body was kept awake for 40 days after he died. This was done to prevent the spread of disease and to allow his body to be properly embalmed. Ultimately, Alexander's body was buried separately from the rest of his remains. The location of this tomb is still unknown, but it is believed to be somewhere near the city of Babylon. If you enjoyed learning about Alexander the Great and other historical figures like him, then make sure to subscribe so you don't miss out on future videos. Thank you for watching.